And we welcome to the show, John McAfee, longtime friend, longtime pastor. Thank you for joining the podcast today.
It is a pleasure to be here, sir.
And we want to talk, and we've for those who are listening and watching, we have John here today because he has a heart for small church pastors, small town pastors, and he has written an exciting book. We're going to get into that in just a little bit. But John, go ahead and tell us a little bit about your youth ministry experience.
Well, youth ministry it's always been a passion of mine. It's still a passion of mine, even in my later years. Paul and I, we go way back. What, about 25 years, 30 years?
At least.
Yep. Back when we were youth ourselves, practically. But youth ministry has always been a big part of my life. God's allowed me to be able to go on, missions trips and youth camps and do all the crazy stuff with youth. But youth discipleship has always been a huge part of my life. And what's exciting for me about youth ministry is I have a 23-year-old son now that is going into that as well. And I'm watching him grow in the area of discipleship. So maybe I've done something right because there's fruit there.
Yeah, but have you not asked him to? Have you asked him, like, son, have you really prayed about this?
I know, I tell you. But youth ministry's been been a beautiful ride. You can't take the youth out of a pastor, a lead pastor. I still work with youth today. I'm as you said, in a small church. Small church is not something to be ashamed of. It's matter of fact, it's an apostolic calling, I believe, that God sends you somewhere and you respond to whatever need is there. You respond to the whatever the area of ministry is, and there's just not a lot of active people who are called into youth ministry where I live. We kind of live in a more rural setting. And so I get to be involved in youth ministry even in my 50s. And the funny thing is when I was in my early 20s and mid 20s, I was really interested in being kind of cool and hip, and
cool. You were hip.
The backpack kind of thing with a guitar strapped to your back and throw a football around. Now then, I'm afraid I'm on a trip and have to get a hip replacement or something if I do something wrong. But I've turned into cool hip type persona to what I've considered myself as. I've just become a father. You can't find youth pastor in the Bible, but you'll find father everywhere. And I find in the culture that we live today, there's cool everywhere, but we're lacking fathers. So I ride that father title pretty hard, and try to just be a dad to kids, and forget the cool and forget the hip. And they know I don't know how to use my phone very well, and they know that I'm pretty much an idiot when it comes to technology. But they know I care, and they know I love them. And right now we have a food program. You can see kind of behind me, Helping Hands food program. And we employ several youth right now at our church, and most of them are from backgrounds where it's pretty difficult. And so I still live in that world of youth ministry every day. It just looks a little different than it did 25 years ago.
Yeah, you're not playing dodgeball every week.
No, but I will tell a quick story. 5 or 6 years ago, I was at youth camp, and it was dodgeball, the dorm leaders versus the youth, and I forgot my age for that moment, and I went absolute nuts, and I was taking kids out left and right. To this day, my right shoulder is jacked up.
Oh, listen, I occasionally have those moments as well, but I resist them all the time. So I understand. But I think what you're saying is so powerful, because your role has to evolve. If it doesn't, then you just look a little silly. But you know, that's what First John talks about, right? You don't have many fathers, right?
Right.
You don't have that. You have a lot of other things, but you don't have many fathers, and eventually, you know, you take on that role. Tell us a bit about, you know, the church that you're in, and maybe a little about the ministry you have to youth there. You already mentioned that you employ several at your food bank there, but because we're talking about the context of, you know, small churches, and by the way, when I thought about the book, you know, in our minds, at least in my mind, I should say, my mind went to like the senior pastor, right? But that's not what this is about. This is about if you're a pastor in a small church, if you're whatever, if you're a worship pastor, or if you're a youth pastor, or if you're an associate pastor, you know, that term pastor we covers a lot of ground.
It
Okay.
does, a volunteer worker. I mean,
Oh, sure. Or
absolutely.
bivocational pastors, bivocational youth workers, whatever it may be. And but tell us what about the town you're in, and you know, kind of what the makeup is, and maybe a little bit about your youth
Well,
ministry out there.
okay, the town I'm in is Sikeston, Missouri, which is in the kind of what's known as the Boot Hill of Missouri. If you ever look at the state of Missouri, you'll have on the left, or the eastern side, there's this little, it looks like a boot hill, and so I'm a little bit north of that, but not by far, and about 17,000 or more in our community. It reaches up to probably in our school district about 20,000 plus. Some people say, well, that's not rural. I'm like, I dare you to come here and tell me it's not rural. We are the regional area for this Boot Hill area, which is like cotton, rice, soy, and corn, and just agriculture. We are the bank city for the area. We are the area where if you're looking for a new combine, I can hook you up, kind of place. So we are rural, and so my very traditional, very southern, very traditional. We have also diversity in color in our community. Probably about 7,000 or plus that are in the census claimed to be African American. We have large population regionally that considers themselves Mexican. And then we have your, Caucasian in the area, which tends to be difficult in some ways if you allow it because of history and whatnot. So we have kind of diversity of color, diversity of economics. We're very strongly impoverished, and then there's some very wealthy people as well. So it's a very dynamic type atmosphere to have a church. So my church is predominantly white and older, which has developed into less evangelism but protecting our stuff, kind of a church. And so since I've been there, we've been there almost 6 years, and we have started a ministry through the Tim Tebow Foundation called Night to Shine. It's a ministry for special needs community, marginalized people we've just embraced. And we started a food program, Helping Hands food program. Right now, we are feeding about 300 kids a week during the summer. That's about 4,200 meals and about 300 gallons of milk. And we're a small church. We also do a drive-through Christmas. We have 13 acres that we're looking to rebuild on, and we've converted into a Christmas card for the community called Light Up Sikeston with the Hope of Jesus. And so we are trying to do things that are community related. I become a chaplain for my police department, and I absolutely love my chief of police. He is a brother in the Lord, and I just become a great friend. And the sheriff of Scott County and I are very close. And we just become really, if you're going to be great in God's kingdom, you got to learn to be a servant of all idea. And so with all of that, sometimes that causes friction within the church because you're feeding into a welfare program in their eyes that is not a good thing to do. We just need to have people like us kind of mentality.
Yeah.
And so with that, we have I know we're focusing on the youth side tonight. So with that, I focus on the youth as well, but it's not the traditional. This is your father's youth group kind of thing, Oldsmobile youth group kind of deal. This is different. It's very relational. It's Monday through Sunday ministry rather than a big group setting. It's small groups. It's me driving a truck to and taking a youth with me, saying, "Tell me your story," and and getting plugged in. So we have probably about 2,100 students K through 12 in our school district, and the best we can tell is only 10% of them are church, is being reached by church. So we have 90% of our student body that doesn't have a faith in Christ. And so that's become a strong push for me as a senior pastor, a lead pastor, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
to reach out as a missionary to that group. And they're not looking for the guy that knows how to dress cool. And man, that ship sailed a long time ago when it comes to you know fashion advice for youth. They're not looking to me anyway, but I'll tell you what, they love the fact that I spend time with them. And kids are needing to learn how to change tires on their cars these days, and they're needing to learn how to job interviews, and so we just try to love them through those type situations. And but we're seeing a lot of pastors getting discouraged in these situations, and I guess my place here as I start getting a little older here, I'd like to become that encouragement to say, never give in, never give up, press forward, excel in that small town, that small church. So you may be a church of 120 people, but your community, if it's 17,000, that means your ministry is 17,000 people. You're not 120 people, and so that's kind of the mentality that I run off of. So.
Well, I think it's fantastic, John, because there's so many youth pastors watching and listening who think that youth ministry has to look a certain way. It has to look like whatever's trendy and whatever's cool. And I understand it's all age. If you're listening or watching to this and you're 25, okay, youth ministry does look a certain way. It does behave a certain way. But even if you're that age or in your 30s and you can't, by the way, if you're 25, the ship has already sailed for you too. Okay, let's not, you don't know anything cool either. Your coolness stopped the minute you quit becoming a teenager. Okay, you're not in the in group anymore. You're playing catch up now at 25. So for those that are listening, those that are watching, just don't be too proud. Okay, but I will say this is that youth ministry is allowed to look different. It doesn't have to be trendy. It doesn't have to be everything. They, like you said, they need fathers. They need, adult supervision, if you will. They need somebody to speak into their life. They need to work with food programs. They need to, drive along in a truck with their pastor and go, on what are hospital visits or do things like that. It doesn't always have to be that. True discipleship isn't always, about programming. It's not just about what's.
Would you rather?
Yeah, it's not just about what's on the calendar, right? And in fact, I would say, I said in the last episode that programming is oftentimes the enemy of authenticity, that we can program relationships right out of the existence because we're not taking that kid with us. We're not spending time with them. We're just running program and hoping everything goes okay and that the numbers will reflect how good we are, which is totally not about us. So I appreciate you talking about that, John, because so many youth workers need to hear that youth ministry doesn't have to look like that. But I also hear your heart about discouragement because, being a youth pastor for 30 years, it certainly has struck home with me. I've talked about it here on the podcast and on YouTube here, where it is a nemesis. It comes at inopportune times, and it's a guest that stays too long. And so, but that's what we want to talk about. I want to talk about your book, Dear Small Church Pastor. Tell us a little bit about what inspired that. You said you're pastoring this church for 6 years, and so you certainly have perspective on that. But what did you say one day? I mean, was it a thing where you just sat down and said, man, I'm just hearing so many things. I feel like I got to express this somehow. How did this come about?
Well, it, I'm not that intelligent of a guy. Academics is not my strong suit. And if you remember me back
So,
in the
so,
day,
so far, you're not good looking and you're dumb. So
yeah.
that makes you a perfect candidate for God to use you, I guess.
Hey, listen, if you want to be a pastor, you can do it.
That's
Kind of thing. No, man, it's about relationship. Am I allowed to use the Bible in this?
100%.
I'm kidding.
Just don't just don't make a big deal about it. Okay.
Yeah. Ecclesiastes 9, King Solomon sees something incredible. And this is answering your question, by the way. I'm not
Sure.
going on a tangent. He sees, he says, I saw this poor but wise man. And it's in Ecclesiastes 9. You can read about 13 through 15, maybe. And so King Solomon sees this poor but wise man. And he says, and he saved his city from the evil king that laid siege works around that city. And what caught my attention on that is King Solomon is the wisest man on the globe at that time. God gave him wisdom when he asked for wisdom. God said, and because you asked for wisdom today, I'm going to give you power and wealth as well. And so he got the full middle deal when it came to, this gifting from God. And Paul writes in Ephesians 1 that may God give us the spirit of wisdom and revelation that we may know him better. And I think to know him better means to know his heart. And his heart is for the poor. His heart is for the marginalized. His heart is for those people. So to know God better is not to understand him simply in his glory. That's obvious. Okay. His glory is awesome. Yes. But he wants us to know his heart on earth and know him better. And that's what wisdom and revelation comes from. We know that. So King Solomon sees this poor. I qualify at this point. Somebody like me qualifies to do something for God. A poor but wise man. But he understood that wisdom didn't come. Solomon knew that wisdom wasn't given by man. It was given by God. So this poor man had a connection to God, and he recognized that this wisdom was from God. And so that's why he said it was wise. And so this poor but wise man saves his city from the evil king who laid siege works around it. And so many of our communities today have an evil king of poverty, evil king of racism, evil king of, man, you can fill in the blanks all day long. Mm-hmm. They've laid siege works around your city. And as a small church pastor, we have the responsibility to be wise, to ask God for wisdom, the spirit of wisdom and revelation to know him better. And so with that, I noticed that as we went through COVID, there was a lot of pastors who smiled at the camera, smiled in front of the people, but they cried in their office.
Yeah.
There was a lot of pastors who were leaving the ministry by the droves during COVID. And it really bothered me because we have so many small communities of 300, 500, 2,000, 10,000 throughout America, from Alabama to Florida to Missouri, whatever. We all have our rural settings. And if we lose our rural, small church pastor, 80% of our church in America across denomination lines is under 200 people. 80%. Do you know how huge the small church is? It's the biggest thing in the world. The small church is the biggest family in the world because we are connected. And so I was one day on Facebook, I just saw this. It was just one day, I saw several pastors just discouragement. And I'm like going, what in the world are we doing? But then I started thinking from the idea of a pastor, and I sat down at my computer And I went, "Dear small church pastor." I had no idea what I was doing. And I basically just said on Facebook, "Don't get discouraged. Don't do this." And so it received a pretty good amount of likes and thank yous. And so a couple months later, I thought, man, I'll do that again. "Dear small church pastor." And I wrote another one. Well, I had been writing for that last couple of years, just some thoughts, and just from pain and from bad choices and just life, and become kind of just writing some transparent thoughts down. And I was reading some of my stuff, and I put the "Dear small church pastor" at the beginning. I was like, I wrote letters when I was writing this stuff. These things can be formulated into letters. And so I went through each of these writings, and you remember our good buddy Chuck Tate, right?
Sure do.
Yeah. Well, Chuck Tate wrote a book about 41.
Yep.
41 will come. And the funny thing is when I finished this, I had 41 letters.
Wow.
And now I don't know if it has anything to do with Chuck or not, but I would, if I was you, I would pick up that book. 41 will come. Awesome book. And he's a friend of ours.
That's right. Chuck has given you his
He used to be a cool youth pastor. Now he's a cool pastor with cool hair.
Yeah, he does.
I don't have any hair anymore.
Hair
But I began to just write and formulate these into letters. And I didn't know what I was doing at the time. So a buddy of mine, a pastor in St. Louis, I went to college with, I told him what I was doing. He's like, "You got to write this. You got to put this down." And so I sent it off to about 4 or 5 different pastor friends of mine in my district, and said, "Just be honest with me." And every one of them said, "You got to print this. You got to print this." And I was like, do I? I don't know. I don't know how to do it. And so anyway, I back in September, this friend of mine had a couple ladies in his church that had been involved in editing and stuff. And he goes, "Let them read it." And so they cleaned it up a little bit, but needed a lot more cleaning up. But they did a pretty good job. And I started looking at different printing companies, and I was like, man, I probably should do this. And I thought, Lord, I understand in Bible, whenever somebody puts a fleece before the Lord or whatever, because why would God want me to do this? I mean, good grief, look who I'm just me. And so I said, "God, I can't afford to do this." I'm telling God, God's saying, "I want you to do this, but Lord, you can't afford to do this," is what I was saying to God. And so I called several places and talked to them, and 3 companies said, "Nah, that's not what we're looking to do." And 3 or 4 of the companies said, "Man, we'd really entertain this." And so I went with Zulon Press, and I called them, I kid you not, on October 30th. And I said, "I don't know what I'm doing." And he goes, "You're a pastor." And I said, "Yes, I am. Guilty as charged." He goes, No. He says, "Listen," he says, "we have a 50% off discount today, or through this month of October, for pastor appreciation for pastors who want to publish a book. And it goes off tomorrow." And I was like, let's do it. Yeah. I didn't even talk to my wife about it. I went home and I may have goofed up here.
Listen, no, as wives do understand a good deal, though.
Yeah.
50% off.
Yeah, that's what I just want you to know. I saved you some money today.
That's it.
Yeah. And so I submitted it, everything, and from January to about March, I had to relearn MLA handwriting stuff, and give credit to people. And it was just, and so the process of going, oh, I know why. I've always wondered why these hip, cool pastors who write books use a King James version. I know now. It's public domain.
Exactly.
And it's easy to do.
Yep.
And so anyway, and I just started that process. And about 3 weeks ago, I got a box in the mail that had a couple free copies of it in there. And it was just a surreal moment. And to be honest with you, I'm still a little bit nervous about it.
Yeah.
Because I know the author. And
Yeah.
and it was never something that I ever thought I would do. And so I just wrote these 41 letters. And I tell in the beginning of the book, don't read this like a book or a novel or a how to. Trust me, it's not a how to book. But just walk out to the mailbox, pick up a letter from a friend, read it. And then you may put the book down, and a month later, pick it back up, walk out to your mailbox, and you get a letter from a friend. And that's kind of the way it's generated is so it doesn't matter if you're a youth pastor, it doesn't matter if you're a male lead pastor, female lead pastor, youth pastor, Sunday school teacher, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's written simply just to encourage those of us that are boots on the ground in areas that you have to be called to be, and encouraged to be there. So
Yeah, and listen, those that are watching, those who are listening, listen, John's seasoned. He's been in ministry a long time, and like he said, the role of that he wants to take in this book is simply to encourage. And imagine going. I mean, anybody that goes through COVID as a pastor is qualified to talk about that. I think because the times were so discouraging. The times were for many of those pastors, like you said, that many of those pastors just left. They just felt like they couldn't handle the pressure, or they just weren't ready for the times, and or like we were talking about earlier, sometimes sheep bite, and terrible things happen, and they just can't handle that. So, but you have, for those that are listening and watching, give the people a context here. You have a letter prepared, I believe, that
yeah,
you're going to read to them, and I hope I hope that you guys hear this, and I hope that whatever John reads is going to be encouraging to you, and that you'll sense, John's heart about it, because he really wants to encourage you as youth workers or pastors or associate pastors or whatever your role may be, kids pastors, whatever your role may be, that this is a book of encouragement. Like John said, it's not a how-to book. It's not a manual. It's simply a letter from a friend. So, John, tell us if there's any context or anything like that, or if you're just going to read it, whichever one you want to.
yeah. I mean,
thematic. I don't know, anything like that.
we've all read the Psalms, and we know that Psalm 117 is the shortest, psalm, and Psalm 119 is the longest psalm. In a sense, there's a little bit of that. Some of these letters are very short, and some of them are lengthy, and it all depends on the content. Like, I share stories. My daughter, she is 19 now. When she was 4, was diagnosed with cancer, and we were told if she didn't have surgery within the week that we would lose her. And that's a season of pain in my life. I tell stories in there about, I remember telling God, I pastored in Wisconsin, and I had to snowblow every morning. We lived on a very busy intersection. I had 3 acres of church on this intersection, and it had sidewalk, and you had to be you had to every morning from November through March, you had to snowblow that by the sidewalk every morning, or you would get cited by the city and you'd have a ticket. Well, 3 acres on a corner is a lot of sidewalk.
That's a lot.
And one day the snowblower messed up, and I yelled. I was on the sidewalk. It's like 3 below zero. And I and I said, I yelled it to God. I said, God, this is a real fine way to use a Bible degree. And I yelled it. It wasn't quiet. I yelled it. I took that snow blower and I pushed it back to the church garage. I shoved it in there. I don't care what it hit. I slammed the door and I walked. I got home, and I had snow all over me because it had exploded, and And I looked at my wife and said, I don't want to hear it about this beautiful snow right now. I hate this place or whatever. And a little bit later on, I had a time with God, and God spoke to my heart and said, I know a good way to use your Bible degree. And I tell that story in a letter in there. But the letter I'm going to read right now is a short letter. It'd be more kind of like your Psalm 117 kind of thing. It says, Dear small church pastor, sometimes we all may feel as though we have been banished to the Isle of Patmos. The Isle of Patmos was a small island with the main purpose of being isolation for those sentenced to life in prison. More than likely, Patmos was a mining island that used prisoners as slave labor during the Roman Empire. John had much different experience when he was banished to the Isle of Patmos than his fellow prisoners. He experienced one of the greatest revival services ever attended by anyone in the Bible, and was only attended by John and Jesus on the Isle of Patmos. Jesus said, "Come up higher." Desire his presence and not the adoration of man. Serve him with faithfulness, obedience, complete surrender. You might feel isolated, but you are never alone. God said, I will never leave you or forsake you. I am with you until the end of the age. If you feel all alone, listen. Can you hear him saying, come up higher? Faithfully serving Jesus, John McAfee, small church pastor.
I love that so much. I love that you sign them. I love that you sign them that way, just because, like I said, it's a letter from a friend. It's not a how-to. It's not those things. It's a personal letter that anybody could read, and anybody's listening right now heard that and said, I'm a small town pastor and I struggle, and I watch it on, Facebook, message boards. I see it on, the people I coach. It's, people are listening to that, man. I hope that helped you. I hope that fed your heart a little bit, that said, listen, come up higher, get with Jesus. You feel isolated. You feel like there's nobody else listening to you. You feel like nobody is paying attention to you. Well, let me tell you something. Jesus is paying attention to you. He is right there in the midst of everything you're going through. John, that is really, really something, man. If that's just a taste of, and there's 40 other letters in there that,
Yeah.
if read as a daily devotional, or as, however people want to read it, it's a good dose of inspiration, a good dose of compassion and empathy. I think that youth workers, pastors, anybody working in the church really could use at any season of their ministry, whether they're just starting out or whether they've been doing it for 20 years. So it is a great letter, and it sounds to me like it is a fantastic book. So first of all, thank you for writing that. Thank you for thinking of pastors in small churches who are struggling still, even in this post-COVID era that we're in. And but we're watching the numbers, and you've seen the numbers that isolationism, loneliness is up. That's across the board in every area of work. The church is not absent from that. So if you're listening, you're watching, and you feel that way, this book could be a tremendous inspiration and tremendous help for you. So John, thank you for writing it. Tell us a little bit about where people can find you, John, and especially let's start with this. Where can people get the book? Because I'm going to put all that in the show notes anyway. So where can people get it? It's not even out yet, right? It's not even launched technically.
No, it comes, ebook is out as of June 30th.
Okay.
On all kinds of platforms. The hard copy paperback will be out July 10th, which is this Saturday. People are pre-ordering it through different ones, but the easiest way for me right now, I made a website, and part of this is a learning for me. It's called johnmcafee.com. I can make sure that I spell it properly for you here in a minute, but on johnmcafee.com, I have all the links to Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Target. Matter of fact, if you look up Dear Small Church Pastor, what's really fun, and this is just the innocence of me being new to this, is looking at it in all these different languages.
There you go.
Yeah, I don't even, and it's a lot of fun. But like in the book itself, I have four categories that I try to say within. It's there's a level of encouragement that we try to give several letters to, and I have a section called Occupy. It's personal story that where I don't, not to give up, stay in the battle. Winston Churchill, never give in, never give in. You know, his famous. And then I have one on obedience, a section on obedience. And sometimes it's just God says stay, and you stay. God says be quiet, you be quiet. So a section, and then I have one on pain and self-care. So 4 sections of this book. And so it's in what I call tree form, which will come out on July the 10th, and then the E form was out on June 30th. So
Well, yeah, that if you're listening right now, go over there, go to the website, go to johnmcafee.com, and go ahead or go to Amazon or wherever it may be and get yourself an ebook right now. If you need some
and if
encouragement,
you want it in German, you can find it.
there, and we do have a great international listening audience, by the way.
Okay.
Lots of people from across the globe listen to this podcast. So if you are wherever country you're in, you can probably get it in your language, because I know there's people in other countries. Discouragement knows no bounds. Whether you're a church in Uruguay, or you're a church in Russia, or you're a church in Germany, wherever you are, discouragement will find you, because it's a
Right.
human problem.
Right.
But in the church, it's exacerbated, for many reasons. But John, thank you so much. Thanks for being on the podcast, and thank you for sharing. Let everybody know where they can know. They can reach you on John McAfee. Are all your socials there as well, if they want to follow
Yeah.
you? As well?
JohnMcAfee.com. You can John McAfee on Instagram and Facebook. That's how you spell it, on there as well. But I also have a link on there for an email.
Okay.
So I have to just hit the link, and you can email me. But I'd be happy to be your friend on Facebook and follow you on Instagram, and just do life together as we serve our fellow men in pastoring in some pretty small areas, pretty small churches. And let's just do it together. Let's do it together.
Perfect, John. Perfect. Thank you so much for being on. And if you're a small church pastor of any kind, go grab the book today. It's going to encourage your heart. John, thanks for being here.